everyone, Yuva Kumar here and welcome back to Cockpit Stories. Today I have for you a very interesting story wherein the pilots actually ended up shutting down the wrong engine. So one of the engines had a problem and unfortunately the pilots ended up shutting down the correct, properly working engine for some reason. Today we're going to see what happened on this flight and how the crew finally managed to recover the aircraft and still land safely. Let's get started. So back in 2017, this Airbus A320 was scheduled to operate a flight from Delhi to Mumbai, a short 2-hour flight. When the aircraft was taking off from Delhi from runway 09, at 115 knots of airspeed, the aircraft had a bird strike, which basically means a bird went into engine number 2. Engine number 2 is now the right engine. As a result of the bird strike, the engine started vibrating because two of the blades on the engine got bent. Now this vibration caused an alert in the cockpit. Now remember, the bird strike happened at 115 knots. The V1 for the flight was 146 knots. Now V1 is known as action initiation speed, which basically means if you have any malfunction in the engines before V1, you're supposed to reject the takeoff, which basically means stop the aircraft on the runway and do not get airborne. If any malfunction in the engines occurs at or after V1, takeoff is supposed to be continued and then you're supposed to sort out the problem in the air and then come back and land or divert to another airport as required. Now in this particular case, the bird strike happened well before V1. However, the pilots elected to continue the takeoff because they were not really sure what had happened. The first officer, who was monitoring everything, did not call out what alerts came up in the aircraft. However, he did ask the captain, are you willing to reject? However, the captain decided against it, thinking that the aircraft might not be able to stop within the runway available. As a result, they continued takeoff and got airborne. Now remember, the bird strike had happened on engine number 2, the right engine. After getting airborne, the captain asked the first officer, what is the vibration? Because obviously the whole aircraft was shaking as the blades on engine number 2 were bent. Now vibrations are sensed by sensors in the engines and that is displayed on one of the screens in the cockpit. When asked, the first officer looked at the display and incorrectly reported to the captain that engine number 1 had high vibrations, whereas actually engine number 1 was the healthy engine and engine number 2 was the one which had high vibrations. The first officer got confused in the namings of the engine. So engine number 1, like I said, is the left engine, engine number 2 is the right engine. However, N1 and N2 are two different parameters of the engine, which are basically the speeds of the different compressors in the engine. The first officer got confused in that and he reported the healthy engine as the one having high vibrations. Also, as luck would have it, there was a lot of weather after takeoff and the autopilot just was not engaging. As a result, the captain had to fly the aircraft manually because the autopilot would just not hold the aircraft. Now in his manual flying, the captain did not verify himself as to which engine had high vibrations. He trusted whatever his first officer told him and as a result, he first reduced the thrust on engine number 1 and then cut off the fuel to engine number 1. Now the aircraft was just climbing, passing about 3000 feet when this happened. And now the aircraft is flying on the damaged engine and the correct engine, the healthy engine, has been shut down. Before shutting the engine down, the captain had asked the first officer multiple times, as can be seen in the CVR recordings, what is the vibration, what is happening, and the first officer every time, getting tunnel visioned, ended up saying the wrong information, telling the captain every time that engine number 1 was the engine which had high vibrations and the one which was malfunctioning. Now even after shutting down engine number 1, the vibrations did not subside. The aircraft was still vibrating, obviously because the engine which has had the bird strike is still running and that too at a very high thrust. The first officer, even now, after shutting down engine number 1, still kept on telling the captain engine number 1 has high vibrations. He basically misinterpreted the information shown on the display and as a result created the confusion. The captain, unfortunately, because he was flying the aircraft and dealing with weather, did not cross-check what is being shown on the screen. Now since the vibrations did not subside, the crew eventually, after 2 minutes of shutting down engine number 1, realized their mistake. They realized that they had shut down the wrong engine. So now they tried to relight engine number 1 again. While they were starting engine number 1, the crew, having realized that engine number 2 is the one which is damaged, reduced the thrust to idle on engine number 2. So now the aircraft is in this state. It is at a very low altitude of only 3,300 feet, which is only about 2,500 feet above the ground. Engine number 1 is just starting up. Engine number 2 is at idle. So basically, who's providing thrust? No one. As a result, the aircraft speed started dropping. Eventually, engine number 1 did start up. However, by this time, the aircraft speed had dropped to a very low value of only 139 knots, which basically means the aircraft was about to stall. Also, the aircraft descended from 3,300 feet down to approximately 3,000 feet. So they're getting closer to the ground and their speed is dropping to a very low value where the aircraft just can't fly in the air. Now the Airbus aircraft thankfully has a feature known as Togalock, which basically means when the speed becomes too low, the aircraft automatically adds thrust and gives power so that the speed can increase and the aircraft does not stall. After starting of engine number 1, the aircraft entered Togalock because the computers thought the aircraft is about to stall. Now with Togalock, the thrust came up, the engine spooled up and the aircraft gained speed. Now the engine number 2 vibrations were at 9.9. Remember, above 6 it's not safe, and the vibrations were at 9.9 units for good 6 minutes. That is a very long time for an engine to be operating in a damaged condition at such high RPMs. However, the crew finally managed to get things under control. The correct engine was up and running again. The wrong engine had been brought to idle and shut down, after which the crew did an approach into Delhi to land back. However, they ended up high on that approach also, most probably because they were a little jittered and a little taken aback by what had happened. So they ended up high on the approach, did a go around on the single engine, came back for one more approach and then finally landed into Delhi. Thankfully, everyone and the aircraft were absolutely safe, and as luck would have it, when they were going into their parking stand, probably again because they were a little taken aback by the whole event, they ended up going into the wrong parking bay and they finally had to be towed to their correct parking stand. Now a lot of you keep asking me these questions that what happened to the pilots? What happens after such incidents? Well, what happens is basically you get suspended till the time there's an inquiry going on. DGCA gets involved in such incidents, they do an inquiry, they publish a report, and after that most probably the pilots are given some corrective training, which basically means sitting in the simulator and practicing stuff, making sure that they do things right. And most probably after you're done with your corrective training, you will be back online flying again as a pilot. So that is exactly what happened in this case. And that was the story of how misinformation by the first officer, getting confused by looking at the indications, feeding misinformation to the captain, ended up in an aircraft being in a very dangerous state. However, thankfully, the whole aircraft was recovered and they landed back safely into Delhi. I hope you guys enjoyed the story. If you did, give it a thumbs up, drop in a comment on how you liked the story, and I'll see you guys in the next one.